Right, all right. Final topic. Bayern and Borussia Dortmund want Ko Itakura from Gladbach. First of all, love the player. I saw him a few years back when he was on loan at Schalke and went up with Schalke in Nuremberg actually. And as centre backs come, went through the Man City school, played in the Netherlands. Pep Guardiola was actually a big fan of him. Schalke tried to keep him, but because of their financial situation, couldn't. And then Gladbach swooped in and signed him, and this was in 2022. This is already a few years ago, right? And since then, over the last 3-4 years, he's now 28, has developed into a really good center back in the Bundesliga. Someone who's really good with his feet, really has a really good opening, and can read the game really well. And both Dortmund and Bayern, and we've said this many times, are looking to add more depth to their backline. We've seen how easily Bayern Munich's defense broke apart. They're still overplaying poor Min-Jae Kim, right? He's on 1,000 games now on that poor Achilles. So yeah, I think it makes sense that with the season he's been playing, with the experience that he has, his ability to play both sides in the center back, to play defensive midfield, he can play in a back three, has that Pep Guardiola school in him too. I think this is a signing that makes a ton of sense for both clubs. I guess the real question is which one of those two teams are really going to win out.
Yeah, I thought it was quite funny when I saw Eric Dyer sign for Monaco this week. There was a lot of kind of Bayern fans saying holy shit, when did that happen? What's going on here? Have we got a contingency plan in place here? Because Dyer's proved to be quite an important player for Bayern over the last kind of couple of years. And yeah, that's a testament to kind of just how much of a defense that or how much of a mess that Bayern defense has been. I've literally got the Bayern squad open in front of me, and yes, they've got Upamecano, who will presumably be back from injury and back in that starting role. But beyond that, it's anyone's guess, because yes, Kim Min-jae is technically the starting centre defender. He's technically a top class defender, but his season's kind of gone from bad to worse for Bayern, and he's been suffering with injury, which, as you've noted with subscribers for a number of times, the South Korean head coach or the South Korean FA, I think, have been very critical of him, and then Bayern have said stuff as well. But he's been carrying injuries which have made him very kind of injury prone, I suppose, and it's led to him his performance is really suffering, to the extent that I've seen quite a lot of reports saying that he might just get sold this summer. And I think his camp have had to since prep other journalists saying that he actually wants to stay, but you don't know what's going to happen there. Eric Dyer's obviously moving out, I mentioned a moment ago there, and then there's Hiroki Ito, who obviously signed from Stuttgart, if I'm not mistaken. And he's had a really tough run of it as well with injuries. So all that considered, it means Bayern actually only have one central defender that they can rely on next season going forward, unless Konrad Laimer fancies a shot playing there, or maybe they keep Leon Goretzka and maybe Leon Goretzka and Palhinha can form a decent centre back partnership, because they're obviously not doing much in midfield going forward, but. Yeah, Bayern desperately need central defenders. There's just no two ways about it. And Itakura's an interesting one. He's obviously, as you said, he's kind of a late bloomer, if you will, in his career. But I think what's really good about him is that he's obviously very solid defensively, but he's also very adept at, dribbling out defence with the ball at his feet. His passing's exquisite. He can dribble with the ball if and when necessary. So while he is playing for a Gladbach team that have been frustratingly inconsistent this season, and seem destined to kind of finish the season in another kind of mid-table obscurity, he looks like a player that could make the step up to play for, a Bayern Munich, Borussia Dortmund, Bayer Leverkusen, or teams outside of Germany quite easily. And he's now at that age where he's probably in his prime years in German football. It'll also be interesting to kind of note that the career that he has had would suggest that he might actually have more to offer later in this later stages in his career, in the sense that he hasn't really had, because they talk a lot now about the kind of the wear and tear or the mileage on a player's legs, and while I'm not suggesting that Itakura's been doing nothing from the age of 25. He hasn't really been playing top level, high intensity football up until relatively recently. And that might play in his favour as he kind of approaches his 30s and his 31s, 32s. He actually reminds me a bit of a player, not just because he's at Gladbach, but he reminds me a bit of Dante, the Brazilian defender,
Yeah.
who obviously kind of just had blossomed in the second stage of his career and went on to play quite well in the 30s because he didn't have a really intense start to his career.
Won the Champions League.
And won the Champions League, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he does have some injury concerns, I suppose. He had an ankle injury last year, which ruled him out for a while, and he had a ligament tear the year before that. So, if I was Bayern, I'd maybe do my due diligence there just because of what's happened with Kim and with Ito. But there's no doubt that Bayern desperately need a central defender. And Dortmund, of course, as well, who, as we speak, only technically have 3 senior central defenders in Schlotterbeck, Anton, and Sula. You could obviously include Emre Can in there, but I don't want to because I don't think he's very good.
Dortmund are desperate for a centre back. If they can get Ko Itakura, they should do everything in their power to do it. Is my conclusion for Dortmund. But I do think that if Bayern come calling, and they have an eye on the Japanese market, and they're very popular in Japan, and I think that'd be difficult to compete. And, I actually, the more I think about it, and I thought about Dante too. It was funny that you said that, because I thought about him too. The other one was Ishmael, who they signed from Werder Bremen late in his age, when he was older too, and did really well, right? Sometimes like the more experienced defenders, actually that works. And that's also why they went after Tar last year, and that still could still happen. So I think if both these clubs are really serious about it, it will be really hard for Dortmund to compete, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important thing that's worth bearing in mind with Japanese players. And I might be at risk of making a bit of a stereotype here, but I remember speaking to a Japanese reporter earlier in the year, and they were asking me questions about Kyogo at Celtic and what would happen to him. And I was talking to him, and I was saying, well, he's doing very well in Scotland. And they were like, yeah, but he's going to leave. I was like, well, why would you say that? He's like, because he can't play for Celtic if he wants to play for Japan. And I thought, well, that's a very strong statement to make. I mean, because there are other Japanese players like Maeda who play for, and Hatate who obviously play for Celtic, who have played for Japan. And this journalist was saying, yeah, but I think it's Moriyasu, the Japanese head coach. He's very kind of particular about players playing at the highest level to prove themselves for the Japanese national team. Now, of course,
It's the same in Korea, right? That's why Kim went from Napoli to Bayern.
Yeah, well, I was going to say Itakura's already playing in the Bundesliga, so he's already kind of proven himself. But that's something that obviously would appeal to him if he could play, say, he plays for Bayern Munich, then put him in better stead with the national team. I think the only other thing that's worth bearing in mind is just what both clubs can offer. If Bayern are just offering like a kind of squad position role where he steps in for Eric Dyer or Ito, then Itakura might say, well, do you know what? My career's only just getting started here. I don't want to spend the next 2 or 3 years sitting on the bench at Bayern. And if Dortmund can say, no, we desperately need you to start next season, then Dortmund might be the more appealing option. I think there's definitely there's something to be said for that. But it depends how much both clubs rate him, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that if Itakura comes to Bayern, he'll be playing plenty. Because everyone else is always hurt.
Do you think he's good enough to be a first-choice central defender for Bayern?
I think he's excellent. I've seen him play live, and he's one of those players that you really appreciate when you see him play live. I think his position is so great, and he's a really good football player. And there's
obviously the Max Eberl link as well there.
Yeah, and he's just a tidy player. Like, really tidy on the ball. Accurate. And you can tell that he spent time at Groningen in the Netherlands, and he spent time with Pep at Man City. He's a typical Pep player. He didn't make it at Man City, but Man City signed like 50 guys and then just see who fits. It still means that they fit into the scouting kind of ideal. That they tick certain boxes, and he ticked all these boxes. And the way Bayern Munich play is not that far away from how Man City play because of the history and the links and all that sort of thing. So I think he'd be playing at Bayern Munich. I think he's good enough, and the other thing is he's experienced enough. This is a big factor as well.
Yeah.
So I actually also think he walks straight into the Dortmund squad easily.
Yeah. Well, he should, but Emre Can will probably keep playing. So,
Yeah, absolutely.